Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Just outside Philadelphia, hidden behind a wall of twisted trees and time, there once stood a place so cruel, so broken, that even now, decades after it was demolished, the land itself seems unwilling to forget. Its name was Byberry, Byberry State Hospital. A name that meant nothing to most people until it meant everything. They called it a psychiatric facility, a hospital, a place for treatment. But that was a lie. Byberry was a warehouse for the forgotten, a prison disguised as a hospital, a place where the mentally ill were sent to rot in silence. Thousands passed through its gates. Some walked out again, many didn't. There's no official death toll. Too many were buried in unmarked graves. Too many simply vanished. No records, no names, just bones in the dirt and whispers in the dark. The Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry gained a grim reputation as one of the most disturbing institutions in American psychiatric history. Founded as a facility to care for those with mental and physical disorders, it quickly devolved into a place defined by chaos, cruelty, and unchecked abuse.
Philadelphia State Hospital was infamous for an 80-year history of patient neglect, abuse, and murder.
Oh Lord, yes. I have cried, thinking how inhumane it was. Byberry aid.
My son had been in the hospital for 5 months, and they were about to transfer him to Philadelphia State Hospital. And my husband told my son's psychiatrist that he would rather see him dead than in a state hospital.
In 1907, it began with good intentions. It always does. The city of Philadelphia opened the Philadelphia Hospital for the Insane at Byberry, a sprawling complex built on farmland far from the city. It was meant to be modern, progressive, a safe haven for those suffering from mental illness. But the cracks formed early. Within years, Byberry was overrun. In 1919, 2 orderlies brutally killed a patient, reportedly choking him so violently that his eyes bulged from their sockets. Instead of facing consequences, the men were excused, authorities blaming their actions on trauma from wartime service. Not only were they rehired, but they returned to the hospital with increased pay. By the 1920s, the population had tripled. Hallways became sleeping quarters. Patients were crammed into every available space. Resources vanished. Sanitation broke down. Staff were overwhelmed and untrained. Byberry wasn't healing anyone, it was hiding them. Abuse was a daily reality at Byberry, and it went largely unchallenged. Patients were kept in restraints for days at a time, often without cause. Some were starved, others heavily sedated just to keep them quiet. Beatings were routine. The hospital itself was in no condition to support human life. It was chronically understaffed, undersupplied, and filthy. Basic hygiene was ignored, and medical care was often non-existent. Unsurprisingly, many patients tried to escape, using anything they could find to break free from what felt more like a prison than a place of healing. Journalist Albert Deutsch, in his 1948 book The Shame of the States, discussed what he saw.
As I passed through some of Byberry's wards, I was reminded of the pictures of the Nazi concentration camps. I entered a building swarming with naked humans herded like cattle and treated with less concern, pervaded by a fetid odor so heavy, so nauseating, that the stench seemed to have almost a physical existence of its own. Sheet restraints are used considerably but never reported. The usual practice for the first half-day in female hydrotherapy is to bind patients tautly in restraints with their hands above heads, often causing immobility of the arms when the restraints are removed. Towels are frequently used on both male and female sides for temporary restraint. Cuffs and straps are in general use, in all combinations, partial and complete. Sheets are used to tie ankles, necks, and chests to beds, benches, chairs. Hands and feet are often in swollen condition because of insufficient supervision. From the notes of a 30-member conference at a Pennsylvania hospital, August 1944. L was a young man about 25. so quick and strong that they had a great deal of trouble trying to overpower him. He was given sedation, sodium phenobarbital, every 3 hours. After a while, after I had objected to the doctor, sedation was stopped, and he made a serious attempt to save the boy. I made a copy of his sedation record. In 108 hours, he received at least 90 grains of sodium phenobarbital, making no allowances for probable overdoses and a good bit of hyoscine. The last few shots were given when he had a fever. He had had so many sedatives, however, that it was hopeless and he died. Byberry staff.
Mental illness has become our major public health problem. All of you are familiar with the figures which show the alarming proportions to which this problem has grown.
I'm having a good time when I'm living it. The question was brought to me, actually, why are you so forsaken in this area? Not much about being a priest, but, the question is, be good.
I was hearing voices and sounded like to me they was doing witchcraft. And I was seeing all kinds of creatures and bodies being cut up for food. And I think about that all the time. It won't go away. My mind is completely out of it. But I laugh to keep from crying.
Without a doubt, severe mental illness is a difficult disease, both to live with and to treat. The question is, how do we deal with it?
I guess I'm primarily an advocate because I've been a mental patient. I've been locked up in hospitals, state hospitals included, places like Byberry. And I ended up in the state hospital, and I didn't want to be there. And I fought. Well, at one point, to break my fighting, to make me stop fighting, they strapped me down. And I don't mean physically fought. I just was yelling, screaming, saying, I don't want to be here. They strapped me down at 4-point restraints and kept me that way and for several days until I ended up going to the bathroom all over myself. I ended up feeling so scared, that I was going to be hurt, that there was I was going to stay there the rest of my life. All of those feelings, and you're in a state where what you need the most is some care, and you don't get very much of it.
Patients were stripped of dignity the moment they arrived. Clothes taken, personal items confiscated. Many were sedated, sometimes permanently. In some wards, the stench was unbearable. Buckets overflowed, feces smeared on the floor, bodies laid in puddles of urine. Some patients were locked in cages, others were chained to beds. There was no therapy, no structure, no kindness, just screaming, wandering, waiting. Some patients were locked in solitary for months, others were simply forgotten. There were reports of children being sent there, schizophrenics, veterans, women with postpartum depression, teenagers labeled delinquent. They were all dumped into the same system, chewed up, drugged, and left to fade.
Thousands spend their days, often for weeks at a stretch, locked in devices euphemistically called restraints. Thick leather handcuffs, great canvas camisoles, muffs, mitts, wristlets, locks and straps and restraining sheets. Hundreds are confined in lodges, bare, bedless rooms reeking with filth and feces. Life magazine, 1946. On one occasion, a young patient with a fractured hip was sent to us, 2 West Male Infirmary, and we got him up into a wheelchair for several days, not knowing what was wrong with him. No doctor corrected our mistake until 5 weeks later. Former Byberry aide.
Throughout history, the care and treatment of mental illness was based on a combination of what was known about it, which was very little, what could be done about it, which was not much, and how people in general felt about it. When the mentally ill were thought to be possessed by evil spirits, treatment was either torture or death. When they became a nuisance, they were put onto ships of fools and drifted from port to port.
Difficulty in understanding and treating these illnesses has led to some of the stigma or fear of the mentally ill. I think that their overall behaviors, that is, the symptoms themselves of the illnesses that they have been frightening to people.
But there has also been compassion through the ages, and many mentally ill people were cared for by their families and local communities. In the Belgian town of Gale, the mentally ill have been integrated into foster homes for centuries.
Here, for example, are two of the more than 3,000 patients in Gale. These two are on a farm. They earn their keep, but more important, they feel that someone needs them, and they belong.
But on the whole, large asylums became the rule. The public was protected and mental illness was hidden away, removed from sight. In these asylums, mentally ill people were shackled, sometimes for years. They were lowered into snake pits in the hope that the shock would cure them. They were put on public display and for the price of admission, beaten and tortured. The most notorious asylum was London's Bethlehem Hospital, crowded, noisy, and filthy. Its nickname was Bedlam, a name which soon stood for chaos, confusion, and wildness. Philadelphia State Hospital had a nickname too, Byberry. Byberry was the section of Philadelphia where the hospital was built, far from the center of town. In Philadelphia, it was a word that haunted, conjuring up unspeakable horrors. Children were told, if you don't behave, you'll end up in Byberry. From its beginnings in 1907, Byberry was in the hands of Philadelphia's corrupt political machine. Money for the hospital was siphoned off. Patronage workers filled the ranks. One worker choked a patient until the patient's eyes popped out. The worker was fired, but a politician soon reinstated him with a pay raise. Other staffers were criminals who were given the choice of jail or work at Byberry. Patients were neglected, abused, and died at the hands of workers or other patients. Byberry deteriorated, and in the fall of 1938, the state of Pennsylvania took over and renamed it Philadelphia State Hospital. The first state superintendent described Byberry as a medieval pest house, but the state would do no better.
In the 1940s, the truth finally clawed its way out. World War II brought conscientious objectors, men who refused to fight, into Byberry as workers. What they found shocked them. One wrote in his journal, "There are people lying naked on the floor, smeared in feces. They scream for help and no one comes." They began to document everything: photographs, logs, first-hand accounts. Then came journalist Albert Deutsch. His 1946 article, "The Shame of the States," printed photos of patients piled like corpses in overcrowded rooms, some strapped to beds, some catatonic, some just staring empty. The images horrified the nation. Politicians called for reform. Investigations were launched, but nothing changed, because change costs money and these people had none. Staffing shortages in the children's ward led to tragic consequences. Rather than bringing in trained caregivers, the hospital assigned some of the more stable adult patients to look after the kids. It was a reckless move that left vulnerable children exposed to unchecked harm. Without proper supervision or safeguards, many were subjected to sexual abuse, an outcome that was as predictable as it was horrifying. Another disturbing and now criminal practice at Byberry was the routine denial of pain medication to mentally ill patients. Medical staff at the time operated under the twisted belief that those with mental illness experience pain differently, and therefore didn't need anesthesia or pain relief during or after procedures. Making it worse, many patients couldn't effectively communicate their suffering, leaving them to endure invasive treatments in silence. Charlie Lord, a conscientious objector working at Byberry during World War II, documented appalling conditions. People died in Byberry every week, many from illness, some from starvation, others from violence, and many, too many, were never officially recorded. A nurse whistleblower once said, "Sometimes we just marked them as discharged. Nobody checked, nobody cared." There were rumors of cremations without paperwork, bodies wheeled out at night, mass graves dug behind the West Wing. Some graves had no names, just numbers, and others were never found at all. Today, no one knows how many died inside Byberry's walls, but the numbers, they weren't small. When it opened in 1928, the facility was called the Philadelphia Hospital for Mental Diseases. Its patient population was a catch-all: alcoholics, drug users, people with developmental or physical disabilities, and anyone labeled insane by the standards of the time. In the 1930s, a photographer managed to slip inside and capture the grim reality within. The images exposed the hospital's filthy, overcrowded conditions, prompting the state of Pennsylvania to take control and rename it the Philadelphia State Hospital. The hospital was originally designed to hold around 2,100 patients, but at its peak, the population ballooned to over 4,000. This massive overcrowding pushed the facility beyond its limits. Staff were overwhelmed, resources ran thin, and critical maintenance was neglected. By 1931, the hospital was operating at nearly 300% capacity and needed more than $1 million in repairs just to remain functional. SmithKline French partnered with Byberry to test a new drug they had developed, Thorazine. With little oversight, the company conducted a range of experimental treatments on patients, many of whom were incapable of giving informed consent. Lacking family advocates, these individuals were seen as ideal test subjects, unlikely to raise objections or spark outside scrutiny. As a result, countless patients were subjected to dangerous trials, and many died as a result. Sections of the ceiling had caved in, letting rain pour inside and causing further damage. In some cases, escape attempts were handled by simply nailing patients' doors shut. Throughout its history, meaningful reform never took hold. Superintendents came and went like a revolving door, while the institution continued to spiral deeper into chaos.
The Second World War brought a new awareness of mental illness. Many draftees were rejected because of mental disorders, and returning servicemen were treated for shock.
Son, you're back now, in a world full of civilians, just like I was after 1918. It's not going to be easy for you, but don't let it get under your skin too much.
The federal government canceled its contract with Byberry to treat servicemen because of its horrible conditions. Books and magazines compared life at Byberry to Nazi concentration camps. Byberry held its ground.
Byberry seemed to have been cursed. There were well-intentioned efforts to make it a reasonable institution that cared for people with mental illness, and they never stuck.
In the late 1940s, Philadelphia State Hospital was home to 6,000 patients. It was overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded. Treatment was virtually non-existent. State-of-the-art mental care was warehousing.
Violence at Byberry was constant and brutal. With so few staff, patients policed each other. Some were violent, others defenseless. Predators were never separated from their victims. Fights broke out daily. Sexual assault was rampant. One patient was found with both arms broken. No incident report filed. Another disappeared for 3 days. When she was found, she was in a utility closet, bleeding, barely alive. No one was ever charged.
Many of the regular attendants were drunks who'd get fired at one state hospital and just move on to a job at the next. Some kept control by hitting patients with things like sawed-off broom handles or a rubber hose filled with buckshot.
Nurses were attacked too. One orderly vanished in 1963. His body was found weeks later, stuffed into a wall, half mummified. Records said, accidental death. No one believed it. The first state-appointed superintendent, Herbert Woolley, called the situation hopeless. Despite new buildings and his efforts to improve conditions, he described Byberry as a medieval pest house and said the best he could manage was raising it to the level of a 17th century asylum. By 1949, nearly 2,000 state wards were housed at Byberry, patients with no family to notice if something went wrong. Between 1950 and 1968, hundreds died from drug overdoses and experimental testing with cosmetics and skin products.
It seems not too much to say that we're on the verge of an entirely new era in the treatment of mental illness.
While in the past, we have been accustomed to speak of psychiatric hospitals or state hospitals As mere custodial care institutions, this is now all in the process of changing.
In 1952, a revolution took place with the discovery of the psychotropic drug Thorazine. For the first time in history, patients could bring their symptoms under control.
Tell me why you came back to the hospital this time. What was wrong? What did the voices say to you, Sally? Sally, it's been 3 weeks now since you've come to the hospital, and during that time you've gotten the medicine. How have you been feeling since you came here?
Well, I was so sick, but now I feel fine.
You feel much better now. And what are you going to do when you leave the hospital?
Well, I think now when I go home, maybe I don't have all the children with me for a while.
I see.
When not given properly, these drugs have side effects in some patients. Drugs with fewer side effects would not be developed until 40 years later. But more importantly, psychotropic drugs provided the first vision of mental health care beyond warehousing.
All hospitals for the treatment of mental disease have many problems. Sometimes we despair of ever solving them.
Problems common to state hospitals throughout the country.
With 2 student nurses and maybe 3 attendants, we have all we can do to bathe the patients, get them to cafeteria, take them to the doctors, give them their medications, and try to keep the place clean.
And I'm the psychiatrist out here. I'm one psychiatrist for over 600 patients. What can you expect?
By the late 1950s, most state hospitals had problems. Overcrowding and lack of money prevailed. At that time, Byberry had 7,000 patients. Because the new drugs worked so well, governments began to discharge patients with an eye to saving money.
In the 50s, a person was discharged from a state hospital, given a new suit of clothes, $25, and an appointment at the outpatient clinic. That's not support. That sets vulnerable people up for failure.
Byberry wasn't just a hospital, it was a laboratory. In the 1950s and 60s, experimental treatments were the trend, and Byberry was a testing ground. Lobotomies became a fix-all solution. Electric shock machines were used with no consent, sometimes on repeat. One woman reportedly underwent 76 sessions in under a year. Insulin comas, cold water submersion, teeth pulled to cure schizophrenia. And worst of all was what happened underground. Whispers spoke of a doctor, his name erased, who performed private procedures in the tunnels, restraint experiments, drug tests, surgeries with no anesthesia. Some called him the surgeon. Others said he wasn't human anymore. His patients never returned to the upper floors, and no one asked where they went. In February 1987, a patient froze to death after escaping and being unable to find anyone to let him back inside. Locals on Carter Road often found patients sleeping in their yards, or at times, inside their homes. Just months later, with 40 patients still housed in the forensic ward, something even darker happened. A young female patient was raped and murdered by another. Her body was left on the property, undiscovered for nearly 9 weeks. In that time, other patients reportedly visited the remains. One even bragged about keeping some of her teeth as trophies.
The next day at the President's news conference,
In 1963, the Kennedy administration proposes community mental health centers for the severely mentally ill, and mass deinstitutionalization begins. Over 350,000 patients are discharged between 1965 and 1980. Many patients did well in the community, but on the whole, neither the commitment nor the funding was there to provide adequate services in the community for the severely mentally ill. All of this created a new class of homeless. Some former patients committed violent acts. Others were victims of violence. It was against this backdrop that the closing of Philadelphia State Hospital was first considered.
And I remember a friend and I going through it one day where she actually was sticking to the floor where she lost her shoe. because of the dried urine on the floor and had never been cleaned up.
The other thing that folks often heard about PSH was it was the dregs of the dregs. Some people were buried there, and people just literally forgot about them because they were a challenging population of people.
Call it milkweed. Have you ever seen milkweed?
Yes, I can.
Uh-huh. Well, I have some here, and I'd like to show you this. This is milkweed, and look at this. When you open it, look what's inside. Isn't that pretty? Take some of them out in your hand. Take some in your hand.
As bad as Byberry was, most of the staff were decent people who dedicated themselves to helping their patients.
By the 1970s and 80s, Byberry was a corpse still twitching. Staff barely showed up. Equipment rusted in place. Rats overtook the kitchens. Entire wings were closed off and forgotten. Some patients were locked in rooms for days without food. One was found dead in his room after 2 weeks. The door had been sealed shut by mistake, no one noticed. Reports piled up. Lawsuits grew. By 1990, the state finally shut the doors and left everything inside. In 1989, the remains of 2 missing patients were found in the overgrown fields of Byberry. One had been missing for nearly 5 months. Suicides were also common, with patients escaping and taking their own lives in the surrounding area. Among the many violent deaths at Byberry, one of the most horrifying occurred in 1987. A male patient, Charles Gable, allegedly murdered a female patient, then dismembered her body and scattered the remains across the hospital grounds. In the days that followed, several other patients were reportedly seen playing with parts of her skeleton, including her jawbone and teeth, which they had discovered outside. The killing was brutal, but the aftermath revealed just how far beyond saving the institution had become. And then there was Anna. Anna Caroline Jennings was a gifted artist who spent much of her life moving between mental hospitals, haunted by the trauma of early childhood abuse. In 1982, she was transferred to Byberry, a place that offered her both hope and horror. While there, Anna was repeatedly raped and abused by staff and other patients. She tried to speak out, but no one listened. Even after telling her mother, nothing changed. Eventually, she was enrolled in a specialized treatment program that finally addressed the roots of her trauma. For a time, Anna showed real progress. But then came the budget cuts. The program was scrapped, her care ended. And in 1988, Anna took her own life. In 1987, William Kirsch filed a lawsuit against the hospital, claiming he had been kept in a 4-point restraint continuously for 3 years.
Anna was receiving innovative therapy at Byberry that successfully targeted the cause of her mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder caused by early childhood sexual abuse. For the first time in her life, she agreed with her diagnosis and had hope. Here she was at one of the worst hospitals, getting the best treatment. But her efforts to expose patient abuse also caused Byberry to disintegrate, and she never again received this kind of treatment. A few years later, Anna committed suicide. But in 1986, reports started coming out of Byberry about rampant physical and sexual abuse of patients in one particular ward. One of the victims was a young woman named Anna. She told her mother, who started her own investigation, quietly, secretly, because staff members were threatened into silence. Information was smuggled out to Anna's mother that proved the allegations. Reports had been stonewalled. The guilty went unpunished. Evil had permission. The abuse reports were waiting on Robert Casey's desk when he became governor of Pennsylvania in early 1987. Soon after, he appoints a Blue Ribbon Committee to investigate Philadelphia State Hospital. In September 1987, the Blue Ribbon Report confirms a lackadaisical attitude toward patient abuse at Byberry. It states that management is disorganized and inefficient and that patients are not provided with even an adequate level of basic care. But the last straw was a casual remark made by a Byberry guard to Blue Ribbon investigators. As they were leaving, he said, "See you again in 4 years." This, more than anything, revealed the basic truth about Philadelphia State Hospital. It had resisted reform for decades. Immediately, top management was removed. 4 workers were fired for abuse. And on December 7, 1987, Governor Casey announces that Byberry will be closed within 2 years. When the closing was announced, the population of Philadelphia State Hospital had dropped to 500 patients. Criminal or extremely ill patients would be transferred to other facilities. Some 400 would be discharged into the community.
After Byberry closed, it became legend. Urban explorers flooded in. Paranormal investigators followed. Some came out shaken. Others refused to talk about what they saw. Whispers, screams, figures in hospital gowns walking through walls, flashlights dying without reason, a feeling of being watched, always watched. One explorer said he heard a voice in the tunnel whisper, "Scalpel." Another found a patient's journal. The final entry simply read, "He's coming back tonight." They say the tunnels are still alive, that the walls bleed, that the surgeon's ghost still waits below, and sometimes, late at night, you can hear the wheels of a gurney rolling across bare tile. In the early 2000s, the buildings were finally torn down. Developers built over it, a shopping plaza, apartment complexes, but the land remembers. Locals still report strange lights. Dogs refuse to walk near the old grounds. Children say they see people in the windows of buildings that no longer exist. They say trauma leaves an echo, and Byberry screamed for 83 years. So if you walk those streets at night and hear a faint cry or feel cold hands brush your neck, don't look back. Some of the dead never left, and some want you to stay.
This is just a reminder to subscribe to enjoy our growing collection of paranormal content. Don't forget to like your favorite episode and ring the bell to be notified of new content. As always, thanks for watching.